So last week we started Halachos Kiddush, but there's those that mentioned that we should learn the halachos of the 3 weeks. So we'll discuss some of the outline structure of the 3 weeks, halachos of how to break down the 3 weeks, and the halachos of the 3 weeks, and some practical halacha l'maisa. The concept of the 3 weeks. So the pasuk in the Eicha says, and from there we learn out the Medrash says that there's a certain zman of the Bein HaMitzorim which are considered a time of kronius, of punishment or whatever, and these days we're supposed to minimize and enjoyment, etc., and things like that. In halacha, and as well as from the Gemara, you could in halacha you could break down that there's three gdarim or 3 levels in the 3 weeks. There are 2 major time periods, which is the Yud Zayin Tammuz till Reish Chodesh Av, and then from Reish Chodesh Av till Tisha B'Av. For as we see in the Gemara only mentions, the Mishnah in Tainis only mentions Mishnah Nichnas of M'maytim B'Simcha. So the idea of there being a Zman of when you're supposed to not do Binyan Shal Simcha, as the Gemara says, building things of Simcha, etc., is dafka from Reish Chodesh Av. However, as Ramah already says, that there's an Indian brought down in Minhagim to start already from Yud Zayin Tammuz, which is the day that the Romans broke through the wall of Yerushalayim. And as the Magen Avraham explains based on the Yerushalmi, that really even during the first Beis HaMikdash was also in Tammuz, but it was Tes Tammuz. But since the second Beis HaMikdash, which is more relevant to us, happened Yud Zayin Tammuz, so we start from Yud Zayin Tammuz. So there's already 2 zmanim in the 3 weeks, and one is minhag as we see, and one is halacha based on the Gemara. But there's also 3. You could say there's 3 general gedarim, 3 categories of types of things we're looking out for within the 3 weeks. One of them is obviously in Yoni Shel Simcha, as the Mishnah says, Mishnah Nichnas of M'maytim Simcha, that we try to decrease in the amount of things that give us joy, etc., and things like that. So, for one example is that we have to be careful in not wearing new clothes and building certain construction that makes us feel good, or things like that could be also because of simcha. There's another gather, which is the gather of sakana. That there's certain things we shouldn't do because this man is a period of time which is shaykh to piranya, shaykh to danger, to punishment, and therefore we have to be more careful. As the Gemara already says that this period of time is a time when it's shaykh to that if a person, the Mishnah says that if a person has a court case with a goy, he should be careful not to do it within this man of Av, because then the Yidden's mazel is on a little bit of a lower level. So you see that there's a concept of a sakana in these periods of time, and therefore there's certain things which we do because of the inyan of sakana. One of the things, for example, is that we're careful not to do certain exercises or certain traveling or going certain vacations during this period of time because of the inyan of sakana. A third element is the concept that because we're, so to speak, in mourning of the Churban Beis HaMikdash, so there's a concept of Aveilus on a certain level. Therefore, there's certain things that we want to do in order to remember and to make it that distinction between the Zman HaBayis and now. So therefore, for example, we don't eat meat, because meat was something which was dafka b'zman the karbonis. Wine also, the nesachim. There's certain things we're going to do that try to bring out this concept of Churban HaBayis. So these 3 gdarim, again, this is Lufi Ani Estaiti, these 3 gdarim in the concept of the 3 weeks all come with different qualifications and all have different inyanim that will make a major effect. We said before that there's 2 major Zman periods. There's 2 time periods within the 3 weeks. There's the beginning from Yud Zayin Tammuz, from Shiva Asar Tammuz till Reish Chodesh Av, and then there's Reish Chodesh Av until Tisha B'Av, which we just call the 9 days. Reish Chodesh Av till Tisha B'Av is, as we said, the Mishnah mentions Reish Chodesh Av as a Zman, a beginning point. Beforehand, there's no mocker in the Gemara to say that there should be a problem. There's no emphasis, there's no focus that there's a period of time before Reish Chodesh Av that there should be an issue involved. But from the three categories that we mentioned, number one, Simcha, number two, Sakana, and number three, Zeicha L'Chorban, we have to, the halacha will qualify these three concepts. Do they apply throughout the whole period of time? What are we trying to emphasize more during Reish Chodesh Av and on, versus what are we emphasizing within Yud Zayin, from Yud Zayin, Tammuz, and on? When we discuss this concept, so we also realize that there's a major difference in halacha l'maisa between these reasons. So, for example, when we're discussing the idea of simcha versus the idea of pironius, the idea of sakana, there's not the same concept. So, is a person allowed to build do a construction, work on a construction site? So, even if you may find heterim because of the fact that there's no simcha, because it's a necessity, but if it's a dangerous activity, it's also because of danger. When it comes to danger, we have to also understand: does this danger, is it within the 3 weeks, or is it strictly from Reish Chodesh Av? What's the reason to say it's only from Reish Chodesh Av? Because since the Mishnah says Mishenichnas Av Memayitim B'Simcha, and there the Mishnah says in Tainus that you should be careful that if you have it in Torah with a guy, that you should push it off. So it seems to imply that when is the mazel of the yid weaker is dafka in Av. So that means the concept of sakana seems to be only within Av. So this idea of not going on vacations, this idea of being careful. So for example, in camps you have that during the 3 weeks, when it comes to the 9 days, they don't go swimming, right? Before the 9 days, they do go swimming. So you see, there's a cutoff point. So do we have to say there's a cutoff point? Is the Indian of Sakana strictly from Reish Chodesh Av, or there's even a Sakana from before? So the Sdei Chemed actually brings down, the Sdei Chemed brings a little bit of a back and forth within this. The Sdei Chemed is in Asifas Dinim, in the Hilchos of Bein HaMitzarim, in Siman Aleph. So, but there he goes through a lot of different halachas, and one of the things he discusses at this point, whether there's an Inyan already from Yud Zayin Tammuz. And he seems to learn that there's an Inyan already from Yud Zayin Tammuz, also to be careful mitzad, going on vacations and doing these types of activities. So there is some sort of element of sakana. So, the more... I guess you would say there's more of an emphasis on sakana from Reish Chodesh Av versus from Yud Zayin Tammuz is again just being more careful because it's a zman muchim le'piranius, as we'll see in a minute what that means. When we come to the inyan of simcha, so again the Mishnah emphasizes Mishnechnas Av Memayitim B'Simcha starts from Av. So the halacha, the din of the Gemara is that Av begins the period of time where we're supposed to be memayit, to decrease in Inyanim Shel Simcha. So therefore the question is, do we begin? Does any of these processes, things that we don't do during the 9 days, mitzat simcha, let's say building, construction, etc., is that also applied to beforehand? There already, there's machlokes between the Mechaber and the Ramah. The Mechaber learns, and that's the way the Svardim learn, that everything starts pretty much from Reish Chodesh Av. And generally speaking, obviously there's differences, but generally speaking, everything starts from Reish Chodesh Av. Versus the Ramah says that there are things, for example, taking haircuts, and in general, the minig is that you don't get married. The Ramah says from Yud Zayin Tammuz and on. And the Magen Avraham brings down in certain places that the same thing applies to music and other things as well. So you see that Lagabi, the Simcha element, again, there's the cutoff point, the difference between the first period of time and then the last 9 days. When we deal with the final element, when we deal with the inyan of the Chorban Habayis, here it seems that the Chorban Habayis, at least L'das Reiv HaPoskim, starts strictly from the Reish Chodesh Av. The idea of not eating meat, the idea of not drinking wine is something, even though there are some minhagim, and there are some that takar noik from already Yud Zayin Tammuz not to eat meat and not to drink wine, but L'das Reiv HaPoskim, and the Sdei Chemed gets into this as well, is that you start from Reish Chodesh Av. And Al Pi Sfarim makes sense because again, when is the real zman of when there's the inyan of Chorban Habayis is from the 9 days from Reish Chodesh Av is inyan of Chorban Habayis. So you see how these three concepts will play a major role within the concept of halacha. There's also the element of, again, mitzad the inyan of sakana, just to speak for a moment, and the inyan of pranius. Let's just talk about that for 2 minutes, and then we'll get into more practical halacha l'maisa. So those who read today's the daily halacha, so I got into a little bit this concept of the reason of why, let's say, for example, when it comes to saying Shechiyanu, is Shechiyanu, the reason is because there's Avelus involved, or is a problem because of Peronius? And the Magen Avraham brings down two svaras. He's doiche, he pushes away, he says that the Avelus doesn't apply. He says that there's no idea of Avelus because an Oval is allowed to make a Shechiyanu. However, he says, the Gra seems to learn that there is an Indian of Mitzad Avelus, and he learns that since the Indian is only Mitzad Avelus, Shechiyanu is not a problem by Avelus by an Oval. As I spoke about it, I wrote in that thing. But what does the Magen Avraham say? The Magen Avraham says that the issue is Peronius, that this is a Zman Muchen Lut Peronius. This is a time period where we have to be extra careful, so to speak. There's a certain negative energy, there's a certain, the Eibush is looking, and whatever it is, that we have to be more careful in this period of time. So this man muchen leperanias, and that's, by the way, why during these 3 weeks on Shabbos the Haftarah is all about in the Yeshaya, the peranias that are mentioned is again because of the same point. So you see, so there's a correlation between the Indian of peranias and the Indian of Sakana, that they both they so to speak work together. So from this idea, it would seem that there is a concept of sakana from already Yud Zayin Tammuz, because since we say that the idea of Muchal Uparanias is something within the total of the Kol Bein HaMitzadim, so then we should be careful about sakana as well, already from the beginning Yud Zayin Tammuz. But when we're dealing with, let's say, chilukim and halacha, about, let's say, they're going on vacation, or flying a plane, or flying in a plane, or as the Rebbe says about taking a surgery, going an operation. The Rebbe says that a person shouldn't do operations. Is that something which, I mean, obviously a risky operation, and obviously if you can't be, the best thing to push it off. Otherwise, if it's life-threatening right now, it's different. But the question is these are things that you should be knowing from Reish Chodesh Av, from Yud Zayin Tammuz, or even from Reish Chodesh Av, or only from Reish Chodesh Av. And again, it seems like for most poskim, these are Yonim that mainly start from Reish Chodesh Av. So again, this is just more cloistic in Yonim, and now we'll just go into a little bit more of the practical halacha l'maaseh. So we'll do a little bit of mechaber Ramah inside, and we'll discuss a little bit of what the poskim writes about these about the Poel Mamish halacha l'maaseh. The mechaber is in Siman Tov Kuf Nun Aleph in Eirei Chaim, and what's interesting is that just again that Agav on the side is that the order that the Shulchan Aruch goes on is that it first talks about the union of the Tainis, of all 4 Tainis, and then it goes into Tisha B'Av. And in Tisha B'Av, so it has the Indian of the Shvuah Shechol Tisha B'Av. So the Mechaber right away, the way his headline is dealing only with the 9 days. But Ramah is already the one who adds in that there's a concept already from the 3 weeks. So the Mechaber says that Mishanichnas of Mematim B'Simcha. He brings the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that when Of comes in, a person is supposed to decrease in Simcha. And as the Rebbe's word says, Mishanichnas of Memaitin Hayim Memayit of is Davke through Simcha. Ubar Yisrael Dislay Dina Behedi Nachrei Lishtamit Minei Dereya Mazlei, that the person, a Yid, that has a court case with a guy, he should try to push it away. He should try to, as the Magen Avraham says, that he should do it. He should try to push it till Reish Chodesh El. That means the whole month of is considered a period of not an opportune month for these things. So what comes out from here, that is the concept of Mimayit B'Simcha. The Ramah says that Mila Shim Reish Chodesh HaTisha B'Av Noigin Shahamoyel Ubal Bris V'Avi Haben Loivshin Bigdei Shabbos Avo B'Lav Hachi Aser. So the Ramah right away says that one of the concepts within the 9 days specifically is the concept of wearing Bigdei Shabbos. That there's a concept that you should not wear in the 9 days or on Shabbos clothing. That you shouldn't wear Bigdei Shabbos. Now, this is obviously something which we're not necessarily knowing, because we'll see in a minute that most people are today put on their Shabbos suits for Shabbos. But the idea is, let's say Taki you have a simcha. So let's say you have a bar mitzvah. Whether you're allowed to make a bar mitzvah in the 9 days, we'll get to soon, maybe. But let's say you have, it's not something which you could plan out, right? You have a shayla of a bris. A bris you have to make on the 8th day, right? So it's something which is min hashamayim gomrelei, right? It's something which happens right now. So when it's something that happens min hashamayim, so then l'churi you have no choice. The same thing's making Shechiyanu in the 3 weeks. So let's say your child is born. All the Paskin, right? The Mishnah Brura says the Paskin, right? You're allowed to make a Shechiyanu because Min HaShamayim Gadol. There's something that happened Min HaShamayim. It's not something you could. This was actually a discussion we had in one of the daily halachos way back in the beginning. I saw the Mishnah Brura says this clearly. So it's simple. That's something which happens, but that you can't push it off. So the shaila is, what happens when it comes to a bris milah? Who could wear the Shabbos clothing? So the Ramah says that the minig is that only the moil and the balabris and the piaben wear the Shabbos clothing. There's a shaila discussed in the poskim about who should you invite to the simcha. That means since there's an Indian of being mamayit with simcha, so there's an Indian of not being mishtatif, not to partake of a simcha during the 9 days. So the question is, if let's say you have a simcha, or let's say a bris milah, and things like that, which have to be done during the 9 days, should you invite all your friends and relatives, or should you be mitzamsim as much people as necessary? So for a bris milah, let's say you need a minyan, you should be mitzamsim to only get a minyan of people, and that's it. Here's a discussion in the poskim, but the way it seems like a fierce achayis, the best thing is to be mitzamsim. That people should not go and make a big event during the 9 days of simchas and the like, and therefore you should try to restrict and limit how much people come, as well as in the type of food. You should also try to restrict a little bit in how much you should do. It's interesting, by the way, that
just the wedding.
It goes on anything. Any siddhas mitzvah. There's an Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe discusses. It's interesting. He's have dinim of the Alter Rebbe about this in Siman Kuf Tzadik Vav. The Alter Rebbe in Siman Kuf Tzadik Vav, where there he's talking about the mitzaref l'zimun, making a verchas hamazon. So the Alter Rebbe there says that also he mentioned this din of Rish Chodesh of till Tisha B'av, and he talks about the minig about eating meat or whatever. He says that the mitzaref l'zimun, he should be only those that were invited, those people that were part of the Suda, and from there it's mashma also, and as well as in Reish Mem Tes, that there's any Lagabi Sudas mitzvah that and Lagatzi out of Shabbos to be mamayit a little bit and who you should invite and things like that. So this will be one nafkamina Lagabi the din of the Lagabi the Shabbos clothing, but as well as B'tzad B'mamayit in general. Then the Ramah says further. He says, "Afilu b'Shabbos shel Chazoin, even Shabbos Pashas Chazoin, which is the Shabbos before Tisha B'av, ein machlifin l'lveish bigdei Shabbos ki'im hakatzenis levad, that you don't change except for the shirt. That means you shouldn't put on a gather of Shabbos clothes. Now, an interesting point of this is that since the halacha is mitzad kovet Shabbos, is they have to wear Shabbos clothing. What's takedini not to wear Shabbos clothing on the Shabbos of the 9 days? Is this a concept of simcha? This is something what you're doing. Mitzad kovet Shabbos. So this Indian is something which is discussed a little bit, but Lopeil Mamish, again, Bisman Hazeh, which people are not, it's more of something which people do b'derech memela versus something which is as a whole a preparation and a whole simcha to put on Shabbos clothes. You have to also realize in those times they probably had their Shabbos clothing were one set of clothing that was unique that they didn't touch, and versus today you can wear your Shabbos clothing during the week and you wash it out in the laundry or you put it into the cleaners and it's all nice for Shabbos anyway. So there's already a difference. Our status of clothing, and therefore the some poskim say there's no problem of making a shechiyanu in the 9 in Bechlal because there's no real gedarim. The Marshag, as I brought down in today's Daily Halacha, the Mashak says, he says, I never made a bracha on new clothing because today the whole concept of new clothing is already something which is not as new taka. It's not such a simchas haleh. But so therefore things have already changed. The Magen Avraham points out something which is relevant for this kfiyas. He says that if, let's say, Tisha B'av falls out on Shabbos, like this year Tisha B'av is going to fall out on Shabbos, it's a Tisha B'av nidcha, so he says that you're allowed to change your shirt, and he says that those who don't change their shirts, that so he says that those clothing which a person wears because of zayah, because of sweat, there's b'chlal no shayla, you're allowed to change it. Some poskim want to base on this. There's a tshuva from in the Kinyan Torah that he brings down. There's those that want to learn that since this man again we're very noyig in Lagabi Zeya, we're very machmir that we careful not to sweat a lot and things like that. So any clothing that we wore the night before is already too sweaty for us to wear today. So therefore maybe we could change clothing in general, even during the 9 days. And therefore comes the question of showers and etc. This is all part of the same discussion. the Ramah continues, Avol Perisin Perecha Shel Shabbos in Lo She'ira Tisha B'Av B'Shabbos V'Nidcha Shosem Perisin Perecha Shel Shabbos. So another relevant din L'Zman Hazeh, this Kvias, is Lagabi whether you could spread out a Perechas for Shabbos that you put on the mantle, also the Mechaber, the Magen Avraham says, and things like that. So he says that on the Shabbos usually the Shabbos during the 9 days you're allowed to, but if it's Tisha B'Av Nidcha, you shouldn't be Perisin the Perechas. Mishi Yeshlo in the Suin b'Shabbos Nachamu Mutalu b'Shbik Shabbos b'Shabbos Shel Chazon. So someone who's getting married the next week is allowed to wear Shabbos clothing during that period of time. But this is all talking about clothing that you have already, that is Shabbos clothing. But wearing new clothing is already a different thing. As Mechaber says later, Magabi wearing new clothing. Wearing new clothing is another issue. Akelim Chadoshim, that Mechaber says later involved, that Akelim Chadoshim, a person shouldn't wear b'Shabbos. He shouldn't wear new clothing. And the Ramah says, that from Rish Chedesh we're talking not to wear new clothing. The question is, what's the qualification of new clothing? So the Pasuk discuss whether clothing. Already the Mikun Magen Avraham already says that Kelim Chadashim. He says that even pressed clothing are also awesome. They have the same thing, and therefore even pressed clothing you're not allowed to wear. And it's interesting because if the svar is again similar to Avelus, it's also then in Hilchos Avelus. In Shulchan Aruch, in the end of Yom Day, it discusses also that clothing which are pressed are also considered like new clothing. So let's say if you're going to put your suit into the cleaners, are you allowed to wear your suit that you put into the cleaners? Let's say you put your suit into the cleaners before Tisha, before the Shchedish, or even before the 3 weeks. And now you want to wear it during Tisha B'Av, l'chora, based on this should be a problem, because since it's considered a Beged Chodesh, you'll have the problem of wearing a Beged Chodesh. Now, if the problem of Beged Chodesh is because of Shechiyanu, so then maybe since you already had it before, there's no real Shechiyanu in such a type of situation, because you already bought it, so then technically there wouldn't be a Shechiyanu. But l'chora, the reason here it's not Mitzvah the Shechiyanu. Here the reason is not Simcha. It's not the Simcha that you're wearing something nice, something new, relatively new. The fact that you got to clean, there should be a problem. But again, some poskim again discuss this inyan of giyutz about pressing clothing, and again, most poskim hold it's a problem to have pressed clothing from Rish Chodesh and on. However, some want to say that since again, this man has said it's like whether things that we wash out, so things which are so common to wash out, let's say like shirts and underwear and undershirts and socks and pants, things like that, which are yemi yumayim we do every single day. That's no shaila. You're allowed to wash them out and wear them as well. Others disagree, and the Mishnah Berurah is more mashma that you should maybe buy these clothing. It's more mutter maybe to buy them, because then the issue is with Shechiyanu versus the issue of washing them out. So it may be better to buy them if you have a shot. If you don't have enough socks, it may be better to buy the new socks than to actually wash out the new socks.
You did a different Zayah. That's a socks from Zayah.
What?
You just said there's a difference between Zayah and one and not.
That's what got me Shabbos. Talking about being machloek b'Shabbos. I got into Shabbos, and then I said in general, this whole issue of wearing new clothing and what got me giyutz about pressing clothing changes based on that. So you have over here a little bit of a difference again based on the three reasons we said about whether it's simcha, whether it's mitzvah avelus or whatever. You see that it can play a major role in these halachas as well. We'll do one more halacha. The halacha base, it says Rish Chodesh v'ataynis b'maitim b'masa b'matim. That from Rish Chodesh until the Tainus of Tisha B'Av, a person should try to do as less amount of business as possible. Now, this is interesting because when he says business, so as we'll see in a minute, this is the Bevini Shal Simcha, it's business Shal Simcha. The Tosfos and Megillah clearly learns that the issue is mitzat shel simcha. He says that most types of business is not shel simcha. So, for example, is a person allowed to do his work, and let's say a person is self-employed and he gets jobs. Is he allowed to do the jobs because maybe it's masan amatan? Or let's say a person works in in stocks, or he has a website that things like that. Is he allowed to do these businesses? So again, if it's a davar ha'avud, if it's something that he's going to lose, the pasuk say that if it's if something he's going to lose, just like chol hamoyed and just like regular avelus, he's allowed to do it. He's allowed to do it as well now also. But some say that if again the gedit over here is not something which is shel simcha, but it's something which he does on a day-to-day basis, it's part of his livelihood. So then there won't be a Shabbat. If a person is going to make a special trip, he's going to go to China to make a special business deal or something like that, that will be also that's considered. That's what we're saying tonight. The masan u'matan. Ubebinyan shel simcha. When it comes to a binish shel simcha, kigoyin beis achasnas lebenoy, a binish shel tzir v'chir, a bintir shel simcha, kigoyin an vunkiri, shel malachim shreitim l'tzel, l'satif b'tziloi. So it gives different examples of what's considered different types of binyanim shel simcha, of constructions that are done in order to increase a person's simcha. Let's say building for a house, for a chasana, or things like that. The pasuk can get into a discussion about painting a house or doing construction during the 3 weeks or the 9 days. So the most common man again is from Rish Chodesh Av, and from Rish Chodesh Av during the 9 days the best thing is not to do any construction unless the pasuk say if you started already from before you're allowed to continue. And if it's not l'simcha, but it's a necessity, because let's say you have more people coming, and you need the place you need more space, so then you're allowed to do construction in order for space. Likewise, the pasuk say that if let's say something is destroyed, you're allowed to fix it because it doesn't look nice. There's not a gedin and simcha there as well. But painting a new color, that the pasuk say to us even from Reish Chodesh, not from Yud Zayin Tammuz. So just finish off with a tshuva from Ramesh. Ramesh says an interesting thing, which I found Geil Halacha for me very practically. I allowed to build a Svarim Shafa during the 9 days. So the tshuva says a bookcase, but the hoodie is a Svarim Shafa. So Ramesh Paskin is allowed to build a Svarim Shafa during the 9 days, but he says it may be the best thing not to bring it into the house, because through bringing it into the house, and now it's fitting against the wall, or whatever, it looks nice, and now maybe that be the issue. But the actual building of it is actually mutter. He says there's no, that's not, since it's the get that you're doing it for Svarim, whatever, he says there's no shilas. So upon him, this is more in Yonim Shel Simcha, and therefore things that you're doing mitzat Simcha, and things that are going to increase a person, he enjoys it, he gets a nice geshmak, one of them is having a nice house, so if that's going to increase a certain pleasure the person has, that's something you should refrain from doing during the 9 days. And especially during the 9 days, maybe even during the 3 weeks, depending on the situation. Like painting should be machmir, and the cloud, it's best to be machmir in these things. I guess we'll stop here.